So we'll give Militia a minute to try and sort out his upgraded Mac, and it's probably start about two minutes past or so.
Okay, so can you confirm that you can see my screen?
Looks good, yeah.
Okay. Yes, sorry about that. So we have a note taker. Timothy will be taking notes. Would somebody be willing to help him?
So Christian has volunteered already, and Robin is going to help with JavaScribing. So I think we're sorted.
All set. Okay, perfect. Okay. Yeah, sorry, I missed that. Okay, so in that case, I propose we get started. Welcome everyone. This is the late working group meeting during the IETF 110. My name is Militia and my co-chair is Stephen Farrell. So I will briefly go over the agenda for today, and before that, as a reminder, this is an IETF meeting, and the note well applies. Most notably, if you are aware of any patent application to the patent that during the discussions that we have, it is important that you disclose those or not participate in the discussion. So here is the proposed agenda for the day. We will have a short report on the hackathon and interrupt testing that happened, an update on formal verification of one implementation of ad hoc spec, and then we will proceed with the updates on the ad hoc and the open issues. Does anyone want to bash this agenda? I hear none, so we will be going through with this agenda. And then before giving the floor to the presenters, I would just like to bring up one point that was discussed with Ben, our AD, and that relates to the administrative side of the working group, and specifically the milestone on shipping the ad hoc specification to the IESG. So currently this milestone is set for September 2020, which is passed, and this was an initial estimation at the time of the chartering of the working group. So right now I would like to open the discussion on the best date to have to agree on a date that we should aim for to ship ad hoc. There are around 36 issues that are still open on the GitHub issue tracker. That is one data point, and then another data point is that we will be doing the formal analysis work. So I would like to ask for feedback from the authors if maybe 2 IETF meetings are enough to resolve the issues and consider the specification as in good shape. And from that moment, we should count on, I would say, 6 months on formal analysis work to complete before shipping the work to the ISG. So, Joran, John, yes, so, here. So, yeah, so I've seen Joran. Yeah, Joran, go ahead.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, this is, I don't know how to predict this really. Maybe someone else has better experience and can do it. But perhaps perhaps we've fixed all the issues by the end of the summer, and then I mean, so looking at the state of the protocol, it has hardly changed during the last 12 months. So it's been really stable with some really minor change in version 4. And now for discussion today, we are proposing a change, so which is also a minor change, but still a change. So resolving the issues doesn't need to change much of the protocol processing and message format. But we are still changing things right now, so we can't say we are stable in that sense. I don't know. Anyone else has a better estimate for time?
I don't know. Malaysia's suggestion sounded good. Maybe half a year to address the issues and half a year to for the formal verification. Maybe so. Maybe set the deadline for the I don't know, March meeting next year or something ish.
Yeah, that was my initial proposal.
Yeah. I agree with Göran that the current issues will probably be resolved after summer. I don't see any big changes, but they keep popping up small implementation things that are a bit confusing or could have been a little bit better. So in the like corner cases and so on, and I would not be surprised if there pops up more when during the interop testing. It's great to have interop testing. We need to wait until we have addressed all of this.
Okay, so what I hear is that we can proceed with resolving some issues in parallel, essentially, and keep interop testing as we were doing so far. So unless there are any objections, then I would propose to Ben to update the milestone to March 2021 as a rough estimate of when we would ship the spec to IESG. That would give us so essentially 6 months to resolve the issues and 6 months for the formal verification work that we discussed with Kartik and his team, with parts of these two that could probably overlap if there are some editorial issues that do not impact the formal analysis. Ben?
So that would be March 2022, right?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
That should work.
I think there has been basically no changes the last time that would affect Kartik's formal verification, and I don't see any future changes that would affect that either. I'm not an expert in formal verification, but I think that could start or could have started already in parallel.
Yeah, but any change to the protocol, John, would impact those, right? So, I mean, ideally, we would like to freeze the protocol and the format once this work starts. That's how I see it.
I don't think so. I don't think the kind of changes we have been doing lately and will do in the here affect any formal verification at all. Like for formal verification, it doesn't typically not matter if you encode this like this or if you encode it a little bit like this. But
yeah, so I don't see Kartik on the call, so but we can probably ask his input. But so do you propose then an earlier deadline for this, John, or you're happy with March 2022?
I think March is then we have a deadline that we can meet. I don't know. We could set earlier, but that would probably be optimistic, and then we'd miss it anyway. So yeah, I think March is good.
Okay. Any other opinions on this? I hear none. So Ben, if this is fine with you, then we should update the milestone date for March 2022.
All right, sounds good.
All right. Thanks. So that would be all on the chair slides. I will give the floor now to our first presenter, Marco. Yes, Marco is already in the presenters queue. Hi, Marco, we see you. Just let me know when.
Can you hear me well too?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I hear you well. So.
Okay, thanks. This is a short report of the... Oh, slides disappeared.
There it is.
Thanks. This is a short report of the tests we ran during the hackathon last week, and it's essentially the third interop test overall that we had for ad hoc. Next slide, please. Right, so we had tests scattered throughout the whole week, and we considered in total 3 implementations. Mine for Eclipse Californium, one from Lydia, ISI in Contiki NG, and one from Christian in IO Co-op, rebuilding mostly on the PY ad hoc implementation from Timothy that we tested in past occasions. And I think it was the first time that we were testing especially Lydia's and Christian's code. And overall, considering also well, interested observers, we gathered roughly 10 people around this. And it was also the opportunity to build a better framework to track which implementation supports what features and what tests were successful or were failing. So you can find this kind of material together with detailed notes in that shared drive folder. Next slide, please. Right, so the first pair of testers were me and Lydia, and notably Lydia had a constraint set up, including a Zoll constraint device as part of an IPv6 mesh network using RPL. We consider Cyber Suite 2 and authentication method 3, and we actually tested 2 different credential types, KD and X5T, and of course the ephemeral keys were generated differently at runtime each time. We tested both directions and both combinations of roles, and it worked fine. Next slide, please. Yeah, the other pair was Christian and me. This time we consider Cypress with 0 and method 0 with credential type X5T. And we followed pretty close, essentially, the test vectors in Appendix P1 of the draft using those same identity keys and the same non-real certificate device that you have there. And again, we generated ephemeral keys at runtime. This also worked in both direction and both combination of roles. So I actually don't have any failed tests to report. Next slide, please. Yeah, you learn a lot during this. In fact, we were already able to provide some feedback out of this experience to document authors mostly related to the message format and how to handle possible error situations. And we plan to run some more spontaneous interop tests in the coming weeks. But other than that, we are trying to set up another actual 4th interop event about a month from now during that week. We have a doodle for that. So please cast your vote if you are interested to participate for actual testing or even just for observing. And that should be it from my side. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Marco. It's great to see new implementers joining the interop testing, and especially as I understand, this was the constrained implementation of AdHoc in Contiki NG running in a mesh network. So I mean, seeing that code run is really great. We also have another implementation that Timothy leads in OpenWSN and Riot, which was tested with the Python implementation, but to my understanding, Timothy hasn't participated in the interop testing with the ad hoc C implementation so far. But he will give us a brief update on this implementation and the formal verification work that is going in parallel as the next presenter. So, in case anyone else has question for Marco, I would give the floor to Timothy.
Yes, can you hear?
Yes.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you. So I think there was Joran was in the queue. Joran, did you want to say something, or?
I'm just curious about how many independent implementations. I mean, if we look the all 3 interop tests now, how many independent implementation has been involved? Marco, have you counted?
I can count 5 in total, because at previous events we tested also Stefan's and Timothy's implementations.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. And Melissa already said that, okay, we have a Python implementation, but we also have a C implementation that's targeting. Can you go to the next slide, please?
Yeah, just give me a second. Loading a little bit slowly. Yeah.
Okay, great. So the C implementation of ad hoc is targeting also constrained devices and constrained settings. So the goal of this, from this implementation is to have all authentication methods supported in at least the first 4 Cypher suites. Currently, it's a standalone application that you can just build and run on Linux. But the final goal is to integrate it in Riot and in OpenWSN. And in OpenWSN, it will be tested over 6-ish, so over constrained wireless sensor networks. Currently, I've not, like Melissa said, not really participated with this implementation in the interrupts, but I've been testing it against the Python implementation, which has been participating in the interrupts, all previous interrupts, basically. What is currently implemented is all authentication methods and Cypher Suite 0 and 1, although I've only tested signature-based and Cypher Suite 0. And we've started some initial integration work in Riot with Francisco. So there's a PR ready, but I think we're still going to wait a little bit before we're going to merge this into Riot to make the implementation a bit more robust. And integration in OpenWSN is also upcoming this week or next week. Next slide, please. So the work with the Riot people is part of a bigger collaboration. It's a project called Riot FP, where we are trying to build a future-proof, more hardened version of Riot. And within this project, we also work with the Prosecco team at INRIA, which is led by Karthik. And as a work package within Riot FP, we want to formally verify the ad hoc implementation. So the goals of this formal verification is to have an implementation that is that has memory safety, that has mitigations against side channel stuff, and in general, which is just functionally correct with respect to the specification of ad hoc. Next slide. Yeah. So we've had 2 meetings so far with Karthik. The first meeting was basically a meeting where we looked at the ad hoc C code, and we got some remarks from Karthik on how we should structure the code, so it would be easier for us to do the formal verification. So basically, we have a user API that will be used by applications using the ad hoc library. And then there are a bunch of internal APIs that can be formally verified individually. So we'll have a message processing API, a formatting API, a crypto API, which can be mapped to different backends. So far, I've been using Wolf SSL as a backend, but there's also support for Hackle, which is a project also led by Prosecco. It provides high assurance cryptographic library. It's a library where all the cryptographic protocols are formally verified. And there would also be a credential API. So each API can be formally verified separately. So what we'll have to do now is build two implementations. So we'll have to build a high-level, obviously correct version, which will be written in HexSpec. This is a sub-language or subset of Rust. And this will be very short, only a couple hundred of lines of code. And then there will be a low-level implementation written in low star. And this one will be a direct translation of the ad hoc C code. Combined, so we first need to compile the HexSpec code into a F star code, and then combining the F star code and the low star code, we can generate formally correct C code, basically. And then each different part of the formally correct C code can be added to the ad hoc C library. So it will be interesting once this work is done to see the performance of this code on constrained hardware and see what the trade-offs are.
Okay, thank you, Timothy. So, as a reminder, in the last interim, apart from discussing the formal verification of the implementation, we also had Kartik joining us, who discussed plans of his team on also doing the analysis of the protocol itself, and that is an activity going on in parallel in the INRIA Prosecco team, where we also expect input useful for the working group. So, do we have any questions for Timothy? I hear none. So I propose that we move
Actually,
on.
I have a quick question. So, just on the goals of verifying the implementation, which is on slide 3. Do you have a pointer to a description of some other instance of doing this work?
So they have there's a paper, I think at least one paper on the Hackle implementation, where they do the same work. So where the Hackle implementation also, I can maybe look it up. Also is memory safe, has mitigations against side channels and so forth.
Okay, I see somebody's put a link in the chat as well. So, great, thanks.
Okay, thank you, Timothy. So I believe the next speaker, according to the agenda, is Yaran. So here we have consolidated slides for the next two agenda items, which are the changes in ad hoc version 5 and the open issues. So this will take, I suppose, the majority of the meeting time. Yaran, will you be presenting the issues, or John is presenting the next part?
So I will present the slides, but John can wherever.
Oh, okay, because I had John leading the agenda item. I thought he would be presenting, but that's really minor. So just let me know when to change the slide, and the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks. Next slide. So yes, as Malisha said here, three parts of this. Well, there are 3 parts of this presentation. There's the changes in last version, and then the open issues, but there's a focus on error messages, which we hope to resolve this meeting. And then there are some selected open issues. Next slide. Version 5 is a minor update, and it's I mean, reflecting some of the comments from the implementers and some minor other changes. So there are 3 main comments that has resulted in changes in the specification. One is regarding the optional subject name in CredX. So for COSI key, which is a map, we need to define a canonical credential to be verified, since that's not necessarily passed. And in that format of the CredX, that's dependent on the coordinates used, and that also contains an optional subject name, which is the placeholder for an identity that may be used with raw public keys. So that was a comment that's missing, and that's included now. And there was also that was from Michelle, by the way, the first comment. Then Peter had a comment about transport on certificate, and we now put in some text referencing basically the COSI X509 draft. And finally, Marco had some comments on the OSCORE secret and salt. The length of those were hard-coded, and now we've introduced that configurable, but with default values. So those were the changes that was proposed. And then we also made another change, which was basically the end now of a sequence of name changes to this key update function. So now it's simply called ad hoc key update, and it takes as a parameter nonce. And it's basically a straightforward application of the extract primitive with nonce and key. So that's very simple now. We made some clarifications to error messages, where the second example is now a little bit more elaborate than the just simplest case to illustrate how the cipher suite negotiation works. Security considerations were updated. Target security level was discussed in an interim meeting, and there are more details about that now. Key confirmation is also in relation to message 4. We'll come back to that in the issues. And some crypto algorithms that must not be used with ad hoc is included. And finally, there were some updates to the appendices, to appendix on test vectors, which is now actually a test vector for the specification, and including what was in 04. And also the updated text on applicability statement, and more of that later. So these were the changes. Unless there are any comments on this, let's move on to the issues. So the first one is on error message. Next slide, please. Thanks. This we discussed in IETF 109, and basically the question is, we have a format for the error message, what diagnostic messages needs to be standardized. And yeah, next slide, please. So this is the work we've done since IETF 109, and I will show a sequence of things we've done, try to find out what needs to be standardized, and sort of how we come back to almost what we had in the beginning. But anyway, let's take the detour here around how we worked on this. We looked at other protocols and error messages. So here are TLS error alerts, and try to group them into these 7 different classes and some non-applicable. Next slide, please. So that became sort of the basis for candidate error classes for ad hoc. It's very simple to describe. It's first one is related to cipher suite negotiation. Second, about syntax and semantics. Third, about credentials. Fourth, about integrity verification. Fifth, about extensions. Sixth, about authorization, and 7 about internal errors, things not related to the protocol. And then we map that to the protocol execution processing. Next slide, please. So it's fairly simple to see how the various steps map to the error codes in red here for the receiving side. Next slide as well. So that seemed, I mean, that was sort of from the specification point of view, seemed to be the right level of error codes. And then we asked IoT Ops, which is this new working group working on IoT operations. What kind of error codes should we standardize? So next slide, please. And they were very inspired and provided a lot of good input. So I think, so you see here, there's more into the, if you look through the thread starting with the link at the bottom. But it's basically a lot of input saying that, yes, error codes, you could encode them as integer values, use a symbolic label, reserve one status code for success, to avoid complexity, allow high-level codes with not too much detail, but those implementations that can afford more complexity can have detailed diagnostics, can have subcodes. These codes could also be standardized later on. And then an obvious thing about security, that too much error reporting reveals information for an adversary. An error message, there was a comment about an error message related to intermediate progress was missing in this list of different errors. Comment about creating a registry. It seems like a straightforward way to do the extension. And several comments stating that as few as possible different messages, and the difference in the error messages should reflect actionable next steps, which is fairly obvious, but a little bit difficult to realize what is actually actionable next step. And I'll come to that later. But basically, if there's no difference, then diagnostics should be the same. And best diagnostic would require operational experience, and there is currently no operational experience about ad hoc, at least, but other perhaps other related protocols could be used. And an interesting proposal for the type of error message. It could actually be like the last bullet here, saying only my admin can help. Here's your ticket number. So next slide, please. So apart from this comment about intermediary progress, there were not many detailed comments about these particular error classes which we listed. So we brought this to the implementers during hackathon, and we had a couple of sessions discussing this. And as it turns out, I mean, the only actionable error message from the point of view of the ad hoc implementation is actually number one, which we already have specified how to handle. And the other messages, they need some involvement of an administrator. So that's sort of, it's not really clear that do we really need to make these distinctions from the point of view of this protocol. For example, number two might not even be possible to send at all if you have a syntax error. You don't know what the connection identifier is. Number three might, on the one hand side, be too inspecific because you could confuse it with number four, for example. But on the other hand, if you really want to analyze this error, you need to be even more specific. So is this the right level? Number 5 and 6 relates to things that only can be determined by an application. And number 7, while it could be good to have a message like an internal error, it's my fault, try again, that type of error. That could alternatively be handled by transport. So it's not necessarily needed to have an ad hoc error for that. So finally, next slide, please. So that leads us back to the beginning. What should we specify? What should we mandate? For whom should this be actionable? And we don't want to add complexity if it doesn't add value. Diagnostic information should not simplify an attack, and may use transport error messages and diagnostics instead. In certain, rely on that in certain cases. So that talks in favor of perhaps we should group the non-actionable errors into one class and allow applications to define error message content. And the proposal coming up of the hackathon discussion is what you can see on this slide. So we propose a minor change to the error message where we introduce an error code, which is an int, and an error message content depending on the code. And we propose to make an IANA register, but only mandate initially at least 2 error codes. one for an unspecified error, and one which could be, let's say, number 0 and with a diagnostic message, and one for the selected cipher suite not supported, the error which we described carefully today, which also includes the suite supported by the responder. And potentially also define an application-dependent error. So that's where we are today. And now I talked a lot. Please comment. What's your view? Is this good enough? Or do you want something else?
So if I'm understanding correctly, you would essentially just go for the unspecified class and divide these error messages into actionable and non-actionable, with actionable only being the cipher suite negotiation error message, which is, in terms of security, in my understanding, and in terms of the revealing the information to the attacker, the best, but in terms of diagnostics and debugging, would leave many options to the implementers to decide what they want to implement. Is this correct?
Yes, I think that's correct summary.
Okay, so we have John and you.
Yes, there's a comment by Ben on the list saying the proposal on the slide doesn't seem to have the reserve and error code for success behavior suggested by IETF Ops.
Yes, so we could add a code for that as well. That's correct. Thank you for reminding me. So that should be added. I don't really see. I mean, then again, I don't really see. Yeah, I thought that was a good comment, but I didn't see the actionable part of that. So I think that was somehow contradicting the actionable part. What there are, if it's success, then you would use that for the normal message, I suppose. Go ahead, Ben.
Right. My understanding, and this is of course second or third hand, but my understanding was that it's very useful to be able to have like a single data structure element in your application that would hold an error message if there wasn't, or would hold the error value if there was an error, and that you can put the success code in if there's not an error. And so you have this sort of unified data structure that lets you know both if there was success or an error, and if there was an error, what the error was. And so it's not intended to be sent over the wire, but it's just to have a value for local use that you know is not going to be sent on the wire, so it's not going to conflict. If that makes sense.
Yes, well, how would you use it then if it's not sent?
You would have it within your implementation and maybe in some of your log messages or something like that.
Yeah, I mean that certainly for logs that could definitely make sense. So yeah, we could specify, but I mean, yeah. So maybe I'm stupid here, but we're doing protocol specifications, and this is not visible. It doesn't come into any calculations as far as I can see. So
yeah, it's essentially just a promise from us that we will never use that value in something that is protocol visible, basically. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. There's no issue to define that.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah, we've been struggling with this as you hear, and I think that if you're okay with this, let's take this as a starting point, and when people can provide actions, sort of actionable actions that you could do when you get some error, some other error, then we add that error to the register. So I think flexible enough to change. And we could add all the, I mean, in this allocation we could add the other 6 probably errors that we have already worked upon if they are needed, and if not, well, then applications has to decide how to use it. So okay, unless there are further comments, we'll move on to the next part. So here are next slide, a few of the selected a few of the issues we are working on. There is a dependence among several of the issues, and one thing that several depends on is this notion of applicability statement. So I put this first here, although that's perhaps not the most urgent. So as you recall, the applicability statement is a list of parameters that needs to be agreed between initiator and responder for a particular use of ad hoc. And this could be, for example, how you detect an ad hoc message, what method is being used, what transport correlation, which optional message fields are present or should be present with this application, what type of credX is being used, what is the type of identifier of the credential, is message 4 used, and so on. And it seems that so this seems to be a good start, but we need to make further clarifications and to address the case, for example, that one endpoint support different applicability statements. And the reason why this is needed is because the ad hoc engine depends on being able to associate a protocol execution to this applicability statement, because there are a number of decisions, for example, the message format and other things, the fields of the message depend on this. So you need to be able to make this association, and for example, this could be determined by the transport, by the resource, the URI used, or something else. So we don't want to be too restrict on this, too restricted, but we want to give examples and see how, because this, at the end of the day, ad hoc is used for a particular purpose, and ad hoc needs to know what is this purpose. So this is just an information point that we will try to clarify this more, and the comments here are welcome. I don't have a particular question, so unless there are further comments, let's move on to the next. So here's one case where this is useful. So assuming that we have this applicability statement in place. So the question has been around how do we distinguish received messages and the proposal for changing message 1? And the reason is that currently we are, as you know, trying to minimize the number of bytes sent. So we don't have specific fields for which is the type of message. And that should be able to infer from the content of the message. But it's also dependent on the expected processing. So what we think is missing is the high-level processing. So how you get from the applicability statement, which in turn comes from how the message is transported, for example, and that gives you what optional message fields are present, how you find the connection identifiers, and from that you get the security context, and then the expected message fields in the received message. And when you process that, then you can you process that according to the security context, so you know which message field you expect, and then you get either an error or you get a success. So that type of processing we think is missing, and we think we need to be clarified better. So that should lead to this to more simpler ways to disambiguate, to distinguish the different messages. Just to be clear here, there should be no need to a priori restrict the connection identifiers to certain spaces, not even if the endpoint is initiator and responder in multiple connections. There should not be any need to parse the entire message to retrieve the context, and it should work for all messages, including the error message. So next slide. No, next slide, please. So this is the result of the discussion. So in addition to this, the clarification of that you need to have the applicability statement available to be able to distinguish, to understand what is the message format, for example. We also propose to add 1 byte to message 1. And this is to simplify. We can disambiguate with the current messages, but we want that to be more simplified and more robust. And that would be adding a null byte, CBOR null. This is only needed for message 1 because all the other messages have a connection identifier, and by the applicability statement, you know whether it's present or not. So that would be the simple distinction. And yeah, so this is a result of a long discussion. I don't know if there are any other comments on this. Otherwise, we just add it, and all the implementers seems to be happy with this change anyway. Any other comments? Okay, next slide, please. Here are a couple of slides on message 4. So as you remember, message 4 was introduced for key confirmation in the cases where the responder, where the initiator does not receive any message from the responder. And this is basically a MAC over transaction hash, transcript hash, sorry. And that now there's been a request from one of the implementers to support auxiliary data in message 4. So that's the reason for that is they had some use case where they wanted to provide a response for data provided in message 3. And initiator is commonly implemented as a client, so there would be a response, and that yeah. So basically, that sounds like a reasonable request, and it's straightforward to implement because the MAC today is implemented as a COSI encrypt with empty plain text. So we would just add the auxiliary data, and then we would have a encrypted auxiliary data. Does anyone have a problem with this? No problem. Great. Next slide, please. Another comment related to message 4. So the actual text about key confirmation is like this. It says that in deployments where no protected application message is sent from responder to the initiator, the responder must send message 4. And then there has been a number of questions about what if not. And in this case, what if message 4 not reaches the initiator, for example, a lost co-op non-confirmable? And then the lower layers may initiate a resending, and how does the responder then act to another message 3? And we could make it simple for ourselves and say that, well, we assume that deduplication will handle this and this will never happen. Or that the lower layers will, the lower layers will take care of it. But it turns out that not all co-op implementations support deduplication because it's a complication for constrained implementations. And then there is also newly recently a proposal that's issued 85 on stating idempotency. So a solution to this would be that we state that ad hoc should behave as an idempotent resource. So it means that it would send the same resource in response to an earlier message. And no, obviously we don't want to have any new security processing of an earlier message, but we could think of situations where responses are cached, or in case the message 4 actually recreated. So Christian, do you want to say something about this? Did I represent your proposal right?
Yeah. Otherwise.
Oh, Christian, you're breaking up for me. Could you try again?
I was just saying that if problems come up, if there are questions, I can answer them, but you stick with the case, and I don't think there's much better.
Okay.
So I had a hard time. Maybe Christian, if you could write in the chat something different about speaking.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you well.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, something was wrong on my side. I'm echoing, says Christian. Am I still?
We hear you well, Göran. So there was an issue with Christian while he was speaking. He was breaking up. So I asked him if he could write in the chat his comment.
And I see there's a comment from Stephen as well. Okay, so Christian is happy with my statement and can ask if there are questions. And the question from Stephen: Why would AD in message 4 be conflicting?
So what I'm wondering is if there's kind of application data or additional data in message 4, you don't know that that's idempotent.
Right. So that would be a requirement on the application data? Sorry, auxiliary data.
I'm not clear what the bounds on the use of this additional data for message 4 might be, but it could turn on a light switch or something, right?
I think auxiliary data in message 4 is not different than auxiliary data in the other messages, but I think formulating this in the correct way is this idempotency is probably will take a while, and probably we need Christian here to help to formulate what is actually required here. I think we don't intend to change any security aspects at all, but it's to make sure that it's easy to implement on constrained devices.
Yeah, so I mean, basically, I just have a concern that if you look at the web and HTTP GET, it supposedly is idempotent, but reality is different. So that's just a concern that if we assume idempotency, it might not match reality well.
Yeah, I'm not. Maybe in the end we will not use the word idempotent, but write something else. I think whatever we write should be correct. But I think we have not. This was suggested by Christian last week or this week. Yeah, last week. So I don't think anybody has thought about the details that much. Maybe Christian. Mm-hmm.
So in chat, Christian is saying that on application side, there might be the need for the ad hoc part to really cache the auxiliary data path from the application.
So, I mean, I don't know if that would be sufficient, because if the ad hoc implementation caches that, and if the auxiliary data means toggle the light switch, then resending that message could affect the state of the world. So I'm not saying I'm just raising the issue. I don't know what the right answer is, but I think it may be an issue.
Good point, Stephen. We need to think about that.
So I think this is better addressed by placing strict bounds on what we can have in the AD than by requiring that everything be handled on the lower layers, because the lower layers we have planned for this typically cannot do this. Cannot perform the deduplication that would be needed and would thus let the protocol run out of sync.
Okay, so we need to definitely specify this carefully and make sure that it doesn't create these type of effects, or else we need to, yeah, I mean, that's basically, we have something we need to work on. Any other comments? Let's not call it safe. Yes, that's agreed, Ben. Anyone wants to comment on that?
Comment from me, Göran. There's a lot of talk of application data, but I think we have said that AD is not application data, it's auxiliary data.
Yeah, I mean, we changed the name at some point, but it's clear that auxiliary data is intended as an extension for the protocol for certain security protocols which are running in parallel with ad hoc, and we have one draft example of that. So that also relates to what kind of data that actually is passed in the auxiliary data.
Yeah, at least that was
I guess the point here is that we have no control over what we carry in the auxiliary data, and that we cannot guarantee idempotency on it. John, did you want to say something?
No, yeah, I kind of agree. I think even if we say this is auxiliary data, somebody might put something else in it, and even if we said this must be idempotent, somebody might do something else. So
yeah. So it's a good comment. It might not be sufficient with just saying what we intend to use it for. Okay, great. Any other comments?
So we have
yes,
dropped
hi,
it
it's
in
Robin.
the queue. Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, I mean, Stephen gave the example earlier that this might be an instruction to a light switch, say, which obviously is an endpoint with, I don't know, in most cases, binary state. Yeah, so idempotency really makes some kind of sense there. But I think, given that you don't know whether this is going to be used for that kind of binary toggle or for other kinds of application, the key thing is that the behavior should be predictable. So, I think that's probably, it's more important to specify this is how this should behave rather than try to second guess the implementations.
Yeah, good point.
So, Göran, how do you propose we proceed with this issue?
Yeah, I think we have a small design team in mind who could tackle the question and try to get back with the proposal.
Okay, yeah, so that sounds like a good idea. Get back on the GitHub or on the mailing list. I think that would be ideal if we have more technical details on this.
Yeah, we should probably take it to the list, I think.
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Okay, so unless there are other comments, I propose we move on.
Yes, go ahead. Okay, so that was basically that was not strictly the previous slide was not strictly message 4, but it was sort of initiated by the message 4 discussion. This is also related to message 4, but this is instead on the initiator side. So, assuming now that it's the applicability statement that states that we should use message 4 or that we should get key confirmation in some other way. And what should the initiator do when, if not receiving key confirmation? And that's, I mean, this is basically to the borderline of the transport issue, but it's we still need to have an answer, and we cannot in general say I mean, the questions in this issue are things like, for how long shall it retransmit? When shall it clear the security context? And I think we need to be clear that in general, EDHOC cannot answer those questions. This needs to be application input. And we need to make this clear somehow, and this is sort of I think the result of these issues will be some additional clarifications. It's just one thing to note that the key confirmation really coincides more or less with reachability here, that if the initiator can verify the protected message, it means that the message has reached the other endpoint and the right key was used by the responder, so, and vice versa. So it's essentially, as long as the message has not arrived, the initiator cannot really tell either. And the current text is then saying that
So it seems we lost Göran.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So yeah, I just wanted people to reflect on this. Is this sufficiently clear? What we are stating, the initiator can securely protect application data. The initiator should not store the keying material. That's basically what we are recommending here. That yes, it might be that EDHOC has completed successfully, but the initiator has not received the final a key confirmation. And the actions is basically based on what is expected from the application. So that's the proposal here. I don't know if anyone has any comments. Or Marco, do you have any comments on this, on how we can answer these issues?
Looks good overall, and I think in the end it boils down to the initiator having as part of the applicability statement on its side for how long it can still live without key confirmation received.
Yeah, or if that is something more application. I don't know if that is the part of the applicability statement, but that's one way of solving it. Okay, thanks, Marco, for the input. I just wanted to check if anyone has a better idea. Otherwise, we try to clarify things in the way I proposed here. So please move on to the next slide. And now it's a couple of slides on test vectors. So there's been requested to have test vectors in JSON, and that's already used by INRIA. And I was going to ask who will be involved in making a template, and then Timothy already sent something today. I haven't looked at it. Could you please tell me what you've done, Timothy?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, I've just uploaded in a comment what I've done so far. So I've just put all the test vectors from the test vector file in a JSON format, where I have 3 keys. I have an initiator key, a shared key, and a responder key, and basically all the messages or all the computational values that are being computed by both sides are structured under the shared key in the JSON map, and the inputs that are really specific to the initiator or the responder are under those keys in the JSON map. But it's probably clear if you just have a look at the file I've shared in the issue than me want to explain what I've done.
Great. Great, thanks very much. So that's very welcome. So what we'll do, can we do this? I mean, does this map a particular Cypher suite or method, or can we do this in general for all the test vectors?
I think it can be done for all the test vectors. I've been using this type of template for the different test vectors that are in the test vector file. So I don't really see any issues with the different types of authentication methods or different types of Cypher suites. I guess the only thing we need to be clear about is the name of different names of the keys in the JSON map. So it's easy for people to parse it. But otherwise, I don't see any issue.
Good. Thanks very much for this. So then I propose that we actually start using those. And so what we have had a problem with actually creating. We'll come to that in the next slide. To spend more time on test vectors. So we are happy if anyone else wants to be involved, and this is an excellent input here. So we should go in this direction, and yes, thank you very much for your input. I think I hear someone typing. It's probably you, Timo. Next slide, please. Another slide on test vectors. So as I mentioned, this is mainly the work done by John on test vectors. Started off with Francesca and then John. And we realize now that the most wanted parts here is to add real certificates and also new Cypher suites. And that is actually what is also most time consuming here. So again, we'd like to ask if anyone is interested in helping out and provide a first run of either with certs or with suite 2 and 3, 2 or 3. In which case we could have that as a starting point, and then we can make interop tests, and then we can augment them to test vectors once they have been verified. So the 3 sub bullets here at the bottom, we think we can provide, but we'd like to have some help with the 2 bullets which are still unticked. Anyone that is interested in helping out?
So there is Marco in the queue.
Yeah, I think with the tests we ran with Lydia especially, we essentially cover Cypher Suite 2. So the output of those tests would be already a starting point, I believe.
Great. Yeah, great. Perfect. Who did Cypher Suite 3? Was that Michelle or who was working on?
Sorry.
No, go ahead. I couldn't remember of anyone, by the way.
Yeah, I said, Michelle was going to do this, and I said I was also going to implement this, but until now I really haven't had the time to do this, so I don't have Cypher Suite 2 or 3 yet.
Okay. Good, but great input, Marco. So we'll try to make use of the results of last week's hackathon and pull this together to another test suite. What about certificates? Is there anyone? I think that Stefan made some certificate. He said he was interested in the certificate run. I don't know if Stefan Ristisov. He's not in the meeting. I don't see him here. Perhaps he could help out with that part. Okay, this was just an open call. See if there are people available that wants to help here. How do we use the JSON format now? Can we copy it over directly to JSON, or is anyone interested in helping out with that? No volunteers. Yeah. Okay.
I can help copying to the JSON format if we agree on the format of the JSON file.
That's excellent, Timo. Thank you very much. So we'll what we'll do is that we'll have a look at your template. We have a discussion either perhaps on the mailing list, and then we agree on that one, and then it's great that you could help us to copy over the text files, and then we'll start filling in the JSON format. Excellent. Thank you very much. Next slide.
So I just have a clarifying question on this slide related to the CBOR native certificate. Could you update us on the status of this draft? This is a draft standardized in COSI, right?
Yep. Maybe John wants to say a few words.
Yeah, so that's correct. It's in version 8 or something now. There has been a lot of discussion in COSI, so this has not been working group adopted yet because the charter needs to change. There have been several requests from non-authors from several different non-authors to working group adopt this, and several of the COSI interims have been completely taken by this CBOR certificate. Now it's finally in working group adoption right now, but I think it's moving ahead quite well, but it's probably a bit behind ad hoc in maturity, but I think it's starting to be quite stable.
Yeah,
Okay,
just to
thank you.
jump in, Ben Kadek, I'm the AD for both Lake and COSI. So COSI is currently in the rechartering process. So there's going to be 2 rounds of ISG review, and there's a public last call period in between the 2. And so we're currently doing the first round, the internal review with the ISG and IAB for the new COSI charter that will allow us to work on the compressed certificates. But I don't know of any obstacles to us doing that.
Okay, thanks, Ben. So what I gather is essentially that the draft is not yet adopted, but there is a good prospect of it being adopted once COSI recharters. So if there are no objections, I don't see an issue with having test vectors in the ad hoc spec using this format. So with that, I propose we move forward.
Just a final comment from my side on the certificate. So there was actually 2 implementers requesting certificates. As I remember, Stefan requested CBOR certificates, and Peter requested ordinary DIR encoded certificates. So there is actually a request for both. But we'll see what people can provide here and help out with. But eventually we should have both. Okay, sorry, next slide. Okay, how are we time-wise? I think there are 2 slides left, essentially, of the main slides.
We have 1 minute left, so we are good on time.
Okay, good. So here's another pretty specific issue, but still might be worth having. Open up for discussion if there is anyone that has a opinion. So as you remember, there is this byte string identifier type defined in ad hoc to make a compact encoding of short byte strings, relying on the use of CBOR ints, which can be only 1 byte long. But it needs to be mapped back to a byte string, since this is used for connection identifiers, and connection identifiers are used as OSCORE sender IDs, which are byte strings. So this is a slight complication in the specification, but it reduces the ad hoc overhead. It's a note that's also used for other things than connection identifiers, but that's the main use case. And then there are 2 ideas from Christian in this issue. One is to use the same trick for efficient coding of longer byte strings, so not only 1 byte CBOR objects, but 2 byte CBOR objects as well. And since we anyway have a mapping step, that wouldn't necessarily make this more complicated, although this is already a complication. And the second idea, which is kind of independent, I think, is that we would decouple the ad hoc type from the OSCORE sender IDE, in the sense that we would allow ad hoc to just use either int or byte strings, and then make the mapping at the point when we do the rest of the OSCORE context establishment, which would then be more flexible in an ad hoc and simpler in the ad hoc setting, but complicate things when you do the mapping to OSCORE. I mean, you're just pushing the problem, but it would maybe be simpler in the ad hoc setting. So that was, if I understand the proposal. Christian, do you want to add something?
Well, the only thing I can add here is that it's primarily about coding density of ad hoc for cases that are not OSCORE, because OSCORE has this requirement to have this mapped in some way anyway.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Any opinion on this? Should we do any of those?
I think we should analyze and discuss. I think it's a bit too early to say whether we should do anything.
Yeah. No spontaneous ideas here. So I think that's, I mean, it's a really late issue. So I think that's a good comment. We haven't really thought through, but it's a good comment. It's a good issue. So those interested, please join the discussion, and we try to progress it. Next slide. This is the final slide where I sort of highlight issues, and then there is a last slide on some other open issues. But this slide is on the mandatory to implement Cypher Suite, which we have been discussed for quite some time. But it's still a final comment here, which I think we should just bring up. So if you remember the outcome of the previous discussion, which was basically the problem with supporting both ECDSA and EDDSA in constrained endpoints. And the result of that discussion was that we said that the constrained endpoint should implement either Suite 0 or Suite 2, corresponding to EDDSA or ECDSA respectively, whereas less constrained devices should implement both. And now Malisha had a comment, sort of reiterating why again did we not mandate Suite 2? The previous considerations, maybe, at least when it comes to performance, were probably not accurate. So processing time, code footprint, and message overhead is more advantageous from an ECDSA point of view, according to Malisha. Maybe you want to add something here, Malisha?
So yeah, maybe just a general remark. When I was going through this issue, my feeling was that people were mostly giving preferences, not really based on technical arguments behind their preference. So I was trying to steer up the discussion in the direction of really discussing the details of both aspects, both performance and security. So my argumentation was related to these 3 points that you can see on the slide. So processing time, code footprint, where ECDSA seems to be favored over EDDSA. And I was asking for more input on specific attacks and how do those attacks on ECDSA reflect on constrained devices and the hardware accelerators that are typically present on those. So yes, Göran?
Yes, now I hear you. So that, yeah,
Oh.
great, thanks. And I mean, from my understanding, we had a discussion about security properties. Maybe John can fill in exactly what was the reason. But I also remember the different. I mean, having talked to different implementers and different companies here, and there is a clear preference for EDDSA in certain settings, and what that is based on, I'm not. I mean, there's obviously is. I mean, initially there was at least a security and performance argument. I don't know exactly what is the state of matters.
So that was precisely my point. I've seen preference being given on the thread, but not exactly technical argumentation behind that preference. And I would really like to understand if these are. I would like to avoid having religious kind of preferences and really focus on the technical ones. And that's the reason why I jumped into this discussion, trying to steer it in that way. Stephen, did you want to say something?
Yes. So, I mean, I think, I'm not sure religion is available here. It's not really a religion, it's more what tools are available. But what I really want John DeQ to say was, I think at the interim we had back in January, René Struik raised this issue again. And if I remember the discussion was that we were going to have a discussion on the mailing list about this. I can't remember if René was supposed to start it or if we were supposed to start it as chairs, but we didn't have it. So I think we should have that discussion on the list anyway.
So yeah, that's correct. I mean, there was an action point on behalf of René to restart the thread, pointing to the best current practice on selecting an MPI suite, which was not done in the meantime. So yeah, we should get back to that on the list, I suppose.
Right. So I guess probably better is that we take the action as chairs to kick that discussion off. Maybe it was just ambiguous as to whether it was René or us who were supposed to do it last time. So that's all. That's what I wanted to say. We should start that next week or something.
Sounds good. John?
Yeah, yes. Following, I think some of the companies wanting to have EDDSA expressed that offline and not on the GitHub. So, but I think depending on what architecture you have, there's definitely, if you have hardware acceleration for ECDSA, that is faster. If you don't have that, then probably EDDSA is much faster, at least in some implementation. It seems quite tricky to compare. René stating that ECDSA with the random noms is much more secure, and then there's definitely security properties with EDDSA, which is much nicer. It's much harder to make something wrong. There's one more aspect that has been pointed out by companies wanting to use EDDSA, and that is that Curve 25519 can be used for threshold cryptography. And one company wanting to use ad hoc especially asked for that and said that was a main benefit with that curve.
Okay, thank you. So could I ask you to send an email to the mailing list summarizing these arguments that you just mentioned in an attempt to restart this discussion and to converge on it?
Yeah, I can do that.
Okay. Thanks. Okay, so Göran, do you have any more slides?
Yeah, there was some. I'm reading the issues. Sorry, I'm reading the comments in the Jabber here. So there's a question about the typo. I don't know if there's a typo here. I think this is And then there's a question about EDDSA used for threshold. Yes, that was what I think that was what John stated. Is there some confusion about that? And there seems to be some confusion about which actual slide. Yeah, go ahead. Someone is talking. I'm just joining. Next in queue, perhaps.
So we have Michael in the queue. Michael?
So I was trying to understand the change mandatory to implement Cipher Suite to one based on ECDSA has negative consequences on performance security. So is that comment based upon the, well, first of all, I wondered if that was a typo for EDDSA. So I can imagine it has a negative, if you go to EDDSA, it has negative consequences on performance because it's not on hardware. But I can't understand ECDSA has negative consequences on performance since it's usually in hardware, as the next point makes. But the security people have suspicions about certain curves. So is that what part of that comment is based on? Maybe we could have some.
So maybe I can clarify. So this was precisely the comment, the first comment describing the issue that I reacted to regarding the performance of ECDSA, because it seemed to be like an underlying argument that EDDSA both performs better and is more secure, which is I brought this up again. So.
Edwards?
The Edwards EDDSA that performs better and has better security. So in response to that, I restarted the thread on GitHub, giving the arguments on performance and essentially summarizing the thread, saying that, since most of the devices have hardware acceleration, for ECDSA, the performance, the statement on performance does not hold. So this is just a quote of the old previous consideration that Göran noted. And then as to the security aspects, my understanding is that, there are speculations on the security of the underlying curve of the ECDSA, the NIST curves, but to my understanding, these are still speculations. And there are attacks, to my knowledge, mostly implementation attacks on the ECDSA signature algorithm, which we might or might not be concerned with. So I was trying to point the discussion in the direction of understanding better those attacks of ECDSA for the devices that we target.
My understanding is that there's some ECDSA hardware acceleration, which will accelerate EDDSA equally, but not everybody has that flexibility.
Yes, that is correct. And there is a draft that is led by Rene that explains how to do it, how to represent the Edwards curve in Weierstrass form, if I'm not mistaken, and implement and accelerate it with these generic accelerators that provide generic parameters for the Weierstrass form, but this is not widely available.
It's not unavailable. It's just not widely available.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. That's great. Okay, so maybe John, did you want to say something? You're still in the queue. Okay, I guess not. So yes, so I propose we move on with this on the mailing list, because it is an important issue that we should carefully discuss and have in the archives. So as I said, the next step is for John to send the mail summarizing these technical arguments, including the reasoning behind the preference of different companies wanting to have EDDSA as an MPI suite. Do we have
Okay.
any other comments on this issue? No, I hear none. Göran, do you want to move on? With
Yes,
the
yes,
slide?
please. Thanks
Okay.
for taking the lead. Okay, so yeah, there are a number of other issues as well. I don't know. I mean, we can briefly talk about these if we have the time, or we don't have anything else we'd like to bring up. I think that we've gone through the main issues already now. So, and I think we have a good way forward for those. So yeah, I'm optimistic that we can close a lot of issues in the next period here. But there's been raised some new ideas and new issues, and there is also some old ones which we want to fix. So one is related to opportunistic use case, opportunistic use of ad hoc. I didn't bring up the issue here. Do you want to elaborate on that, Christian?
Just a few words. So this would allow use in cases where there's only one party that wants to authenticate the other, and that doesn't need authentication on its own. I think it should be possible, but it's just not explored currently. So if we spend a bit of time thinking of whether this can work, this might help the document on long-term run.
I think there's been similar comments offline from a company wanting to use ad hoc with raw public key by value. So basically, opportunistic, you don't authenticate the first time, like SSH. You send the keys first time, and then the second, third time and all the for the future times you verify that you have the same talking to the same device that you talked first time.
So there's two kinds of this. The one is, as you mentioned, with sending the raw public key by value. That's what SSH would do, and this is clearly of value and would also apply for the application to resource directory, where a device says, I have this key and let me in again if I can buy this key. But something that a device could also do is, I'm nobody, and don't even try to remember being me, because next time I'll be using a different ephemeral key and won't say anything. And for those cases, it would be more interesting to not send an additional raw public key at all, but explore whether it might suffice to just use the ephemeral key and not use anything in addition, and whether that ephemeral key that's already being sent can also be used to do this kind of non-authentication, to just say, I'm this entity, but nothing more.
So to me, this is a bit extending the scope that we agreed on in the requirements draft, where I think we explicitly agreed on tackling mutually authenticated case explicitly. So I don't have anything against extending that scope, but this should be discussed in detail on the list by the working group.
Yeah, I agree with my co-chair on that. And also, I mean, would we be wise to extend the scope now, or would we be wiser to try and finish what we're doing first?
If that's an outcome of that discussion, I'm also happy with it. It's just it's something that should be visible somewhere. If the outcome is out of scope, fine with me too.
I forget if we had exactly this discussion before, Moshe. Can you remember in the requirements discussion? The discussion may have been had already, but I'd have to check on the detail.
So I'm not aware of the, I know that we have the text in the requirements document requiring mutual authentication and not mentioning opportunistic use. So that is what I was referring to, yeah.
Right, and that was kind of hard won. Now, it just happens that all of the people who might argue deeply about that happen to be off in the dprive working group now, arguing deeply about dprive. But again, if we bring this up again, we may end up with a large discussion. So I'd be a little bit. I'd think about it ahead of time first.
I don't think this was discussed in detail. I think it was just suggested mutual authentication. But I agree. I think we should have the discussion, but this might be some extension work later and not now. And sending raw public keys by value might require cozy work.
Yeah, I if I may add, I think. I mean, if you look at the two cases that Christian outlined here, I think the passing public key by value, that seems to be well founded, and that's issue 82 actually. That we like to have a cozy header map for public key, because that's not, there is no header map actually defined for that. But the other case where you're not sending a key and just reusing an ephemeral, I mean reusing that seems a little bit more speculative in my mind. So I would like to keep half of the this case here, but perhaps not everything in this issue. Okay. Any other comments? There's some ongoing discussion. Yeah. Okay. So that's just Michael and Christian. Then next, deterministic CBOR encoding. John, do you want to say something about that?
Yeah. So this was brought up in a discussion with a company implementing this, and they started to ask question about determinism, and we thought, I opened an issue. I think we should go through the protocol and see if there are any places where things are not deterministic. I think, for example, the integers are probably not specified currently that they are encoded in the smallest possible way, even if that was the intention when we wrote the draft. And I don't think CBOR forces you to do that by default. So I think we explicitly need to state that. But I think this is not anything that would change the protocol, but it would be a clarification in the specification that you cannot do in any other way.
But doesn't this really belong to CBOR specifications and not to ad hoc?
I don't think CBOR is deterministic in this way. CBOR has several ways to encode an int. There might be some part of the CBOR say this is how you get the deterministic encoding, and then maybe ad hoc should refer to that part. But otherwise, you can encode an integer as a single byte or 16-bit, 8-bit, 32-bit. I think that's up to you. I don't think CBOR forces you to use the smallest. But if I'm wrong, please correct me.
Yeah, so I'm not aware of those details. It would be maybe good to have someone on the, if there is someone who is familiar with CBOR details, comment on this. We have Michael.
Hi, Michael Richardson. So CBOR does, you're absolutely right, John. CBOR doesn't say this. It actually says that it's up to us as a CBOR protocol that we need to specify this. I guess there's two issues, I think, with these integers. One is that it's stupid to take more bytes than you need to. However, that's a sender stupidity, okay? And if they wish to shoot themselves in the foot, then I think that's okay. But we just have the signature verification issue, and then I think that we need to specify that you sign and verify what's on the wire, not what you reconstructed. So that gets rid of any canonicalization issues. And then we need to simply say what you just said, that integers are always encoded in the shortest, or should be encoded in the shortest value possible. And that's our business. It's on us to do this as a user of CBOR. And any other things that we want to say, like, such and such can't be a map, or, map keys must not be strings or whatever we want to say.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's might be security aspects of having a signal encoding also. I don't see any direct attack, but if in protocols where you have a weakness, then it's bad if an attacker can have a lot of different choices how to choose things. So typically you want deterministic encoding in security protocols.
Yeah, so I think that's a good point. And Ben commented in the chat, giving a pointer to the draft that takes rules from RFC 8949, which is CBOR, I believe.
Okay, so I think that's a good discussion. And then we have the final issue. Do you want to say something about that as well, John? The status of, yep.
Yeah, so right, I guess some background also, but right now the way you can identify a certificate in COSI is either by sending it by value, or with a URI, or with a hash. And a hash takes 8 bytes. Has been suggested, discussed in both Lake and in COSI recently, that it would be good to be able to identify a certificate with a KID. Currently, COSI doesn't really forbid it, but it doesn't specify how either. I would say it's you have to do it yourself and assign a KID to a certificate and do it. I think COSI discussed this recently, and there seemed to be agreement that this might be good, but not exactly how to do that. And I think that is discussion. There's not been any more discussion. Then I think a follow-up question is whether you need, if you have a certificate by KID, you then also need raw public keys with subject name in them. And key ID is a key identifier. It's just a byte string that you have agreed upon to use to identify the key. It's similar as the PSK key identifier in TLS.
So I remember having this discussion in Lake, and I believe the comment from Michael was that, I mean, with this proposal, essentially we are making certificates a sort of raw public key. And from what I recall, he did not see much value in that. Michael, maybe you can confirm if you're online. Do we have a use case where this would be useful?
Sorry, I missed what you said that I said, so I'm not sure that I can agree or disagree yet.
So I was recalling a discussion in a Lake on the proposal to reference a certificate with a key ID.
Yep.
Where I remember you objecting to this change, essentially saying that this makes the certificate a sort of a raw public key.
Oh, yeah. If the endpoint, the other end can't validate the certificate, then it's just a container for a raw public key. Yes, I would agree with that statement. But I think I need more context for why we were going to do that. But I guess I'll just repeat that. Yeah. So why send the whole certificate if you can't validate it? I guess the point.
So my question then to John is, John, do we have a compelling use case for this?
Either to save bytes or to not have to extend COSI key with subject name to comply with Sigma. I would say use of raw public keys without the identify might not be 100% compliant with the Sigma academic paper. But I think that could also be done. I agree with Michael that there's an overlap with raw public key, and I think I'm not saying we should do this, but I think it should be discussed. After the lake discussion, this was discussed in COSI with several persons in COSI. It was suggested, I don't remember who suggested it, COSI, not me. I don't know if it was for an ad hoc use case at all. And there were several people in COSI seeming positive to the idea, and COSI discussed how to do this without reaching any agreement.
Yeah,
but it
so I
might
guess
be waiting for COSI to do this.
Okay, so I guess in the context of this discussion, we would, as a working group, we would need a little bit more context, and I guess this was just a hint to what could be discussed if there was time, and it is indeed the case. So I propose that we keep this issue open and maybe present it in more details during one of the next meetings of Link. Does that work for you?
Sounds good.
Okay. Okay. So I think.
Yeah, I think we reached the end of list of the hard open issues, and then there are other, perhaps more editorial. So yeah, I think that's where we are basically in the work.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for presenting the issues and leading the development of this spec, Joran and John and Francesca. So maybe we could, I think as the next item in the agenda, we have the next steps where we have, I mean, I could maybe just summarize what we plan on doing in the future period. So I recall from the first presentation by Marco that we will have an interop event in April, and where we will be testing additional we'll be testing the implementations. So please continue with this work, and also it's all great to see these reports coming to the working group. This is very useful. On the formal verification front, Timothy is leading the ad hoc C implementation and in collaboration with Kartik's team at INRIA, this verification is being formally verified for correctness. So that is one direction that we are headed towards. And then the second one is on the formal analysis of the protocol, what Kartik mentioned during the last interim, where we will hopefully have some updates for the next meetings. I will be coordinating, I will take an action to coordinate with Kartik on this work and update the working group as needed. Other than that, do we want to organize interims in the next period? Do you have any proposals? So there is Joran in the queue, yes?
Yeah, I think we should. I mean, interims are good. We basically take the extra effort to prepare for the interim meeting, and that we close a number of issues and so on. So I think that's a means of progressing, and it's also a good feedback channel for people and people to comment and provide new input and so on. So yes, I think we definitely should arrange interim meetings.
Should we aim for one interim or two interims before the next IETF? Maybe
two
have one.
sounds
Yes.
good.
So let's plan to have one maybe mid-April, and then one in mid-May, or towards the end of the May. Does that sound okay?
Yes, sounds good. There is one interrupt. Yeah, I think Marco's going to say something about the interrupt. Sorry, go ahead, Marco.
Yeah, I think for April, the second half is ideal for sure after that interop session we take at least we can report about that and possibly think a bit of issues that can come up after those tests. So second half of April, around end of April would be ideal, I think.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, so chairs will take the action to schedule the next interim for after the next interrupt event, and then we will just we won't schedule the one in May until after the interim. So with that, I don't know we have any other business to discuss. Does anyone want to discuss some related issue? So there is Joran, yes?
I just wanted to say that we are really fortunate about this input process from the implementers. We don't have so much input from people who are not implementing. So if someone would just read the specification or have some specific comments, that would be fantastic. You could either send mails directly to the authors or even better to the Lake mailing list. So yeah, even more comments are welcome. Thank you.
Okay. So yeah, so we have 9 minutes left in the meeting. I propose we call it a day here. Stephen, did you want to add something?
I had very little to do, which is fine. I could just put silly comments in Jabber. It was good. Thank you.
So for me, it was cutting. I didn't hear what you said, except thank you. But okay, so I guess that's it for the Lake meeting. Thank you everyone for attending today, and let's keep the discussion going on GitHub and on the mailing list.